Kevin, a very warm welcome to the podcast. It's really exciting to have you on the show. Now, a lot of people in Jersey will be familiar with you because, of course, your name's been tied to some of Jersey's most trusted institutions, from Jersey Post, Jersey Dairy, JSPCA. The list is endless, and you've served across multiple boards as kind of NED. So when people heard you were backing this proposed project for a subsea tunnel to France, it must have raised a few eyebrows. But what was it that sparked for you about it? Why this idea and why now?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on. Feel very privileged to have the opportunity to talk about this. I think where it came from really was I'm one of the lucky ones. I was of a generation where it was almost impossible not to get a job when you left school, and when you got married, it was pretty easy to buy a home. Mm-hmm. But as a father of three daughters and saw how they progressed and wanted them to progress, I took an interest in how much homes cost. And that really troubled me because I could see that it was a big issue for young people. Mm-hmm. And also alongside that was this obsession in Jersey where we must control the size of the population. And yet we know we've got an ageing demographic, so we are going to have less people working, but we're going to have more people. And I really was just thinking those things through. How do you fix some of that? Mm-hmm. And was on holiday in France and happened to visit the Ile de Ré, where there's a bridge.
I've been there. Yeah.
And, I thought, oh, wow, this is pretty neat. Mm-hmm. And that's really what started it for me was, well, could we have some kind of bridge, physical link to France? And, then all sorts of other possibilities arise.
Interesting. So if we flash forward to the future, say we cut the ribbon to this undersea tunnel or bridge in 2033, how has life changed in the Channel Islands, and what economic sectors would benefit?
Well, that's if it happens, and hopefully it'll still be around if it does, because it'll take a while. Mm-hmm. But I think the things that we might see would be, obviously the greater cultural links with France. Well, we were connected to Normandy back in the day. We would have a greater choice of supermarkets. You often hear the minister saying, I must get a French supermarket into Jersey. Well, we could turn this around and be very easy to go and visit multiple French supermarkets. When we need people to come and work, but we don't have anywhere for them to live, it might be possible to commute in from Normandy. For people who want to have a home but can't afford to buy one in Jersey, there's lots of much cheaper homes. There's all sorts of possibilities that arise from it, Ben. But I've always said that what should happen is that we should really think about it properly, pros and cons, and be objective, because it would be a massively big decision, and we wouldn't be an island anymore, frankly, would we? So, we have to think these things through. So,
and there are political ramifications for that as well, I suppose.
Constitutional, potentially, as well. So, it's, it goes beyond just, how much would it cost, and the states are hopeless at building stuff. It's much bigger than that. It will change our island a lot. I mean, for tourism, which both of us have had interest in the past and still do have an interest, you've got 3 million people visiting the landing beaches. They're not they wouldn't be that's 25 miles away. So
absolutely. And then, of course, there's for retail as well, and encouraging French visitors to visit our kind of high streets and revive our retail economy. And it's been speculated as well that Jersey Airport could become a regional hub for travel, for that entire sort of, the 3 million people that would be served by the subsea tunnel.
And I think that's the thing about, I suppose, Jersey. If you go back into the 1500s, Jersey fishermen were going off to Newfoundland to fish for cod. They would sail. They had big ideas. And I think sometimes we've maybe become a little bit conservative with a small c, and we don't want to think big because it might go wrong. So let's not do anything. Let's hope everything sort of. So I really hope that in the future that we might get this physical link. bearing in mind it'll be controversial. I mean, all these projects, these big infrastructure projects, are always controversial. There's Channel Tunnel, obviously. Sydney Harbour Bridge was incredibly controversial. The Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, very controversial. So you've got to accept that there'll be a very vigorous debate about it.
Yeah. Interesting you brought up the Channel Tunnel because, I mean, that was a project that ran significantly over time and kind of budgets. And there are case studies like the, Faroe Islands, which, we were talking about earlier, where the project did run within budget. So what do you think that they got right that the Channel Tunnel project got wrong?
Well, I think the technology's just got a hell of a lot better than it was, hasn't it? And the Faroe Islands and up the Scandinavia, they've been tunnelling all over the place for some time, and they've clearly got a lot of experience in doing it. As you say, the Faroe Islands, I think there's only 54,000 people in the various islands, and they're now all connected with tunnels, and that community has managed to do it, and they're managing to reap the benefits of those connections.
And then in terms of the financing model, would we kind of emulate what the Faroe Islands did in terms of finding a private operator who can sort of fund the build in return for like toll rights?
I suspect that's the way you would do it. I mean, we've got, one of the biggest infrastructure funds actually is a Jersey company. There's quite a number. So the financing of these projects is quite a well-trodden path now. You look at the French motorways, you look at some of the motorways in the UK, these sort of demand-based assets where a toll can be collected and a return generated like that seems to be possible. So, I don't think Jersey would have the appetite nor, frankly, the money to do this.
Because it's been estimated there'd be quite a long, maybe about a 30-year payback window for that, which feels like quite a long time. But Connect 3 Million, the advocacy group that's been promoting this project, says that in the long term, it would actually unlock 10 times return on investment for the islands. Do you believe in that those claims are accurate?
I have no doubt that sort of investment in infrastructure like that could be a game changer for the island. Frankly, if you look at the tunnel that's just around the corner from here, I can remember as a child sort of seeing that created and the difference it made. Imagine if you took that away now, how people would just get across the island, how much time it must save everybody every day. So I think it would definitely provide a return on investment. And the reality is that, you wouldn't get a private sector operator to do it unless there was a reasonable return. So,
do you think that the reason that there is resistance and scepticism is because it's big, scary numbers? It's might cost up to £1 billion in investment for the island.
I think that's probably it. I think isn't Jersey full of people who can define the problem with absolute blinding clarity, but then don't have a solution?
It was like a lot of people agree on the problems, but don't necessarily agree on the solutions.
No, and they don't have. And very often they don't have a solution. They just, and in a way, that to me is disappointing because I think it's fair enough to identify the problems, and even in a project like this, that's what we really need to do. Is we really need to go through it with a calm and cool head and say, well, what would be the pros of this thing, but what would be the cons, because there would be some, and try and just not let emotion get away. You can't evaluate a project like this on Facebook, frankly. You've got to think it through. You've got to have some people to back it up with some numbers. What would the demand be? What would the cost of running it be, et cetera, et cetera. So,
because as an island nation, we face like a number of challenges that are that aren't unique to Jersey, but probably to any island really. So we've got a finite amount of labour on the island and skilled labour. We've we only have a finite amount of resources. So having this kind of tether would open up a lot of economic opportunities. On the face of it,
I think so. Yeah. I think the other reason that I got interested in the idea was, when my older daughter was working in London, and they wanted to buy a home, and they're looking at the price. If you're in the centre of London,
eye-watering.
Yeah. If you're prepared to jump on a train every day, the further you're prepared you know, the longer you're prepared to sit on that train, the cheaper things get.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, if you do that in Monaco, if you do that in Gibraltar, if you do that in Geneva, that's what happens. And I thought, well, the problem with us is as you get closer to the sea, everything gets more expensive because everyone's got some whacking great mansion on it. But if you could just get 25 miles across to Normandy, there's plenty of places that people could live.
And it's significantly cheaper buying in Brittany or in Normandy. Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the things that has been put to me as to why some people are really against it is they're concerned about what it would do to house prices in Jersey. You know, so and that's a fair, you know, that's a fair challenge, I think. You know, as to what would it do.
You wonder as well that if there was a sort of mass exodus and people started buying houses up in Normandy and Brittany, that might create a glut in the French property market and have an impact there as well.
I mean, I don't know how big Normandy is, but there's plenty of space there, isn't there? For
because I mean, one of the fundamental things that we'd have to get sorted to get this project off the ground is really get the French government on board. And Minister Kirsten Morel said he felt like it was politically solvable, given that it was in our sort of mutual interest to do that. But I mean, if you look at what happened in the aftermath of Brexit with this, feud with the French fishermen, feels like the entente cordiale between France and Jersey hasn't been brilliant as of late.
That's a shame, but I think you know we've had connections with Normandy for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you know, at the moment things are not great, but as far as the fishermen are concerned, but you know, when you look at a project like this, you're going to look past it, aren't you? And you know, what the immediate to the long term. I get the impression that the French would be open to speaking about it, but I mean, the devil will again be in the detail, which is why I always go back to let's do a proper business case. Let's look at not just the building. Let's look at the economics, the cultural, the political, and try and work something through from
all the implications of that. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's getting into the details, but we'd probably need some kind of special residency deal with France so that islanders could live there.
Yes.
And it sounds like that could be kind of quite complex to kind of roll out and would require some negotiation.
And also we'd have to be able to provide some sort of work permits for French to come and work here.
Yeah, that's true.
I think, you know, the last time I looked, the unemployment rates were quite high in Normandy. So, you know, plenty of hospitals in Normandy as well, by the way.
So the tunnel project comes up periodically in news cycles every few years. So why do you think it hasn't happened yet? We talked about cultural conservatism potentially before and sort of risk aversion. Is it just because there wasn't political will to do it? It seems like this government is more supportive of it than maybe previous ones.
I think one of the issues for politicians is that they have to get re-elected. And, you know, they're on 4-year terms. So, you know, the reality is that they've got a couple of years to come out with the big ideas and try and move the big ideas.
Make a short-term impact.
Before they're in the later years where, you know, you almost start the election in the at the beginning of year 4. It feels like we're in an election cycle now, and nobody wants to come up with something crazy that, you know, they just can't get away from when they try to get re-elected. So I thought Deputy Morel was actually very courageous to raise the issue and try and move it on. But I think, you know, we've seen the sort of reaction to it. You know, there was a letter in the paper quite recently about, you know, it's a crazy idea and, you know, anybody who comes up with it should be shot sort of thing. And you just think, well, you know, that's not going to help anybody try to move these things forwards, even if it's just the idea of coming to a proper conclusion as to whether it is actually doable and whether, even if it is doable, would you want to do it, you know?
Well, the late, great Tony Benn once said that the first time that, you know, you come up with a radical idea, people say it's crazy. And then the second time they say, So it's possible, but so what? And then finally they sort of say, yeah, it's a great idea, and I thought of it.
Yes,
and that's
yeah.
how progress is made. Kind of thing.
Well, exactly. And I think the other thing is that we talked about Jersey not being capable of big infrastructure projects, but there have been quite a few that have been successfully done. If you think of Jersey Electricity and Guernsey Electricity with the undersea cables, if you think of Jersey Water with the Queens Valley Reservoir, if you think of more recently JT with the fibre to home, all these things were controversial. Some of them very controversial at the time, particularly the Jersey Water Reservoir in Queens Valley. It was very controversial, and obviously the poor JT guys were getting moaned at because people's kitchens had been dug up and all that,
Not to mention conspiracy nuts thinking that 5G was going to frazzle our brainwaves or something.
But they saw it through, and those were government-controlled entities. They saw it through, and nobody would really want to take those things back now, I don't think, would you?
No.
A reliable, clean power supply.
Yeah. So in hindsight, they were all great ideas.
No, nobody would say, I'd like you to take those all away because they're a really bad idea. So sometimes it takes real bravery, and I think the short political cycles don't always lend themselves to that. And again, if you look at the Chinese, where they don't have to worry about democracy, they can get big projects done, can't they?
Maybe that's where we're missing a trick. Just get a totalitarian dictator.
Those guys, Singapore's the same, Dubai's the same. I'm fully in favour of democracy, but it can slow things up.
Sure, yeah. But there are some really strong case studies. I was doing some research, and the Isle of Skye obviously have a bridge that connects them to the kind of Scottish mainland, and that's been kind of a game changer for Scotland's economy. And we still refer to the Isle of Skye as an isle. So it hasn't lost its kind of island status. And you mentioned the Ile de Ré before. I believe you have a lot of tourists that come from Paris, a lot of Parisians that go and holiday there. So it benefits from a lot of domestic tourism that probably wasn't possible before. It feels like that we dream a bit small in Jersey kind of thing. Sometimes.
I think we do, and we're afraid to, sort of stir things up and have proper debate sometimes. But as I say, I think Deputy Morrell particularly was pretty courageous about it, and I like to think that the current ministerial team would at least are not so worried about being popular, clearly, that they would give it a proper look at and say, well, yeah, nice idea, but it's just not. The time's not right, or.
It feels like one of those moonshot projects, like when JFK said we want to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. But in the sense that it would require political will to be in place for maybe 10, 20 years. Successive governments would all have to kind of pass the baton between each other to get it done, kind of thing.
And I suppose one of the things that actually that can enable that is when, change is hard, but you generally need some urgency for change. Something has to be done. It cannot be delayed or talked about any longer. And I suppose as we see our sort of growing demographic problem, becomes clearer to us all, something will need to be done. And, the islanders will have to see that they're going to have to make some choices. And the choices are more people living in Jersey to care for the increasing number of older people, more tax because there are less people potentially working, less young people staying because they can't afford to buy a home, all these things, or some kind of link that other financial centres would have, which will be a train, a tunnel, a bridge or whatever. Maybe it's time for us to think about that. And I know, I always also think about our close neighbour Guernsey, where it seems insane that we cannot work together.
And you published a sort of a thought piece called The Channel Islands Way, and you talked about that, about how we should basically stop copying London and Luxembourg and kind of, find a way for us to work together and do things our own way.
Just kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And I do quite a lot of work in Guernsey, and I love the island, and almost as much as I love Jersey. And I think, if only we could sort of put the egos down and sort of work together as equals, I'm sure we could achieve a lot more for both communities. But the timing's got to be right when politics is involved, isn't it?
And and a lot of the existential threats you're talking about, they're already happening. We do have an aging population and a shrinking one now. We're starting to see an exodus of young people moving away because they can't afford to buy, and the affordability kind of issue.
I don't know if you saw that the Statistics Unit put out, I think, a week or so ago, an update of the population of the island, and there were. They said 104,000 people. And since 2019, I'm not quite sure why they picked 2019 because we had a census in 2021, didn't we? But anyway, between 2019 and 2024, the population went up by 1,200, yeah? A segment that you would have said were people who were retirement or very close to retirement, sort of 65 and above, had gone up by 2,000. The working sort of population segment, the middle lot, had not moved at all. Mm-hmm. And up to 16 has gone down by 1,200. So
the birth rate is
the birth rate is biting as well. So we really, this is coming, and there's something in the budget for future politicians to say that this long-term care allowance that we pay that's added onto our tax has got to go up because there's more and more old people, more and more care required, and more complexity to the care. This is all, live TV, as it were. These things are happening now.
And we've got a modernised tax base. And I remember reading I think it was a prediction about the future for the island that we needed to have a population of something like 150,000 by, I think it was 2040, to be able to sustain economic growth. I mean, we do need to grow our population in order to grow the economy. And
I like to focus on what's the working population, and in a way also.
So it's more of a demographic.
Rather than the total. And I think there's lots of things that come from that. In a way, this announcement that's come out recently about more nursery care. So if ever there was a sort of no-brainer, sort of allowing both partners to work so that and being able to afford nurseries for their children, has got to be the right answer for the child and the economy and that couple. If you look at also the fact that we're all hopefully all living longer, and the idea of people living to 100 is more of a possibility now. Well, then the reality is we're all going to have to work longer. So, again, there are...
Hopefully not only we're living longer, that we're also healthier, so our health spans will increase, so we're able to work, if we choose to, longer past retirement.
I'm lucky. I'm technically, I'm a pensioner sort of thing, but I love my work and I can do it, and it's not lugging, I'm not a postie lugging a heavy bag of post around sort of thing, so I can do that stuff. But I think there are other solutions. But the reality is we're going to need to bring some people in, and how do we bring them in, and where do we put them?
So that's a good point actually you've raised. So if we couldn't get this tunnel project underway, what's Plan B? What do we have any other kind of radical solutions that could kind of address these problems? I suppose whether that's just improving our kind of travel connectivity in general through air and sea. You could speculate.
The people who sort of say that they don't want the population to go up, and I can understand that to an extent, but you look across the countries like Japan where the population started to actually shrink due to this demographic. You've got whole towns that are empty and houses that are worth nothing because nobody wants to live in these towns because there's no work. We only have to look around the world and see these problems are real, and, they're going to have to be tackled, and a physical link to France and perhaps a closer link to Guernsey are potential solutions that are worthy of proper investigation.
So you've been described as a business guru in the past. If somebody gave you £1 billion check and said, right, you got the political green light, Kevin Keane, what's the first move?
Well, I wouldn't need that much to just get the thing properly looked at and thought through the financing model, the geology of the place, the constitutional side of it. It probably is a few million quid. Everything seems to cost a few million quid. That's what I'd do first, and it could probably take a year or so. But
so be a research phase where we do the surveys, and we look at the
then
seabed.
You can consult with people and say, here are truly the pros and cons of this opportunity. Here's how it would be funded, and here's how much it would cost, and here's the risks.
So that's the smartest first step that government could take right now.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, they probably tried. If you look, there was last year, they had the Faroe Island people out in the island, I don't know if you remember. And,
yes.
They talked about it, and it was pretty impressive what those guys had done and sort of challenges that they'd had. And it started a bit of a debate. I went along to the Chamber of Commerce thing, and it was a business audience. And most people were, I thought, prepared to, maybe starting off, as you said earlier, you must be mad, to, well, it sounds mad, but perhaps I shall just listen a bit more, to a few people saying, well, maybe this actually is maybe this is a goer.
She felt they changed a few people's opinions.
I thought that, there was a bit more, I was a bit afraid for these poor Faroe Island people that they were going to just get sort of shouted down. But that particular audience were polite. I mean, isn't that a thing in Jersey that we're great at sort of keyboard rattling sort of thing? But when we have to look at somebody in the eye, we tend to be a lot more polite. And
there's a lot of voter apathy in Jersey, especially amongst the young generation. And I wonder what younger people might think of the prospect of a project like this. Do you think that they would be engaged with it and they'd be supportive of it?
Yeah, I suppose that's the advantage of youth, isn't it? You think a bit bigger, you think a bit longer term, and you can see, I think, things a bit more clearly. Probably your risk appetite is a bit greater as well, sort of thing. I would think that they would be massively in favour of it, because all of us love going to France. Well, I do. I think it's great, and I'd go more often if it was easier to go,
Absolutely.
So, and obviously we're not just talking about France, we're talking about getting to Europe and jumping on a train and getting to Switzerland or Italy or wherever. We may all be British, but we're Europeans as well, isn't we? And, it's such a great place. So I would think the younger generation would be more enthusiastic about it and more likely to see the upsides than the downsides. The trouble with old folks like me is we sort of tend to look at all the problems and decide not to do anything, potentially because it might suit us. The challenge for the politicians in putting that forward is that it's the older people that tend to vote.
Who have perhaps more of a vested interest in the status quo and keeping things the same as they are.
Or trying to keep things the same. But the reality is that we can't. Things are changing, and they have changed, and they're going to carry on changing. First of all, it needs politicians who are brave enough to be unpopular. Why I would be a useless politician is that I can find something in all that they say, whether they're left, right or centre, that I actually agree with. And to be in a position where you almost have to disagree as a matter of principle with somebody because they're on the other bit to you, means that things are just slow, the sort of adversarial politics, rather than saying, we need a vision for this island and we need to do something a bit different,
When it comes to a large infrastructure project like this, it's not just pure idealism. When we were talking before about, the Faroe Islands is a tangible, real-world example of that working in practice and being hugely economically successful for them. And I can see as a, young-ish person myself that one of the frustrations I might have is the fact that if I want to travel anywhere, then I've got to sort of connect via London, and I've got the the upfront expense and the sort of inconvenience of doing that. And you can feel a bit isolated geographically, culturally, on an island. And I think that having more of cultural diversity. Certainly, the French culture at a younger age is going to make us a more, inclusive and kind of well-rounded kind of population, I think. So I'm just speechifying there my manifesto.
Yeah, well, I vote for you, Ben. Yeah. Obviously, we need a few more youngsters in there. But honestly, I do think that you go beyond the actual physical things and the financial things and think, what would it be like to be closer to a culture that we have, are physically closer to than the UK? What differences would it make? Let's allow ourselves to be a bit crazy for a bit and think about the upsides of it before we get the bean counters in to tell us all the downsides. That's like back to your Kennedy thing about we want to send someone to the moon. Not because it's easy, because it's hard, and, the old story about the janitor sort of thing, we're all playing our part in doing that. And I think that's sometimes that unifying vision where we can all see something positive for the current generation and the future generations is something I think we're really looking for.
Interesting, though. I suppose it's a bit of a cautionary tale in kind of Gibraltar, which is now sort of and talks about joining the kind of Schengen zone kind of post Brexit, and that's kind of stoked some of the far right in the UK who kind of really firmly believe that Gibraltar should remain British, and there's people in Gib on the ground who believe Gibraltar should very much kind of remain British kind of thing. So there's this idea of sovereignty and Britishness that we're obviously very attached to, and having that physical tether to Normandy, is that going to culturally dilute those kind of British roots?
I suppose over many years. I mean, but it does come to another a bit of a hot spot in this debate is, would having a physical link make us more prone to having unwanted visitors from France? That's something that's dominating politics in the UK now, about people, asylum seekers getting on boats to cross the channel. Would us having a link like this make us more prone to that? And again, it's a factor and clearly needs to be thought about, but there obviously would be customs points at each end. We've got links that are constant. The ferries are going backwards and forwards every day, well, most of the time, sort of thing. So, I think we have to be wary of that, but we've got to try and see beyond the many difficulties that we have now to something past that, on the basis that they will get solved. And
because our longer term challenges are probably greater than those kind of obstacles and what they represent.
I think so. I'd like to think so. It's it's a worrying time, clearly, isn't it, in the world, and you look around and you almost don't want to look at the news because something terrible's happened somewhere. But I think we've got to take this as a 20-year project and say, how can we make our island, the best bits of our island, the same, but deal with some of the challenges that living on an island brings?
I think another concern as well could be the ecological and environmental impact of doing a project like this. And we have Ramsar sites and our kind of offshore reefs and the minkies and the acrohos, and we would have to make sure that all of the the seabed surveys were undertaken to make sure that we didn't sort of harm those marine environments.
Without question, which I think is why where this initially started off is let's build a bridge. Once the people started to I started to speak to a few people about it. I said, well, actually, the thing is, it's a tunnel, almost certainly. The tunnel should land down close to where we are now, not in St Catherine's or somewhere. It shouldn't take the shortest point. It should take the best point, which would probably be...
It should be about 20 kilometres. That's probably our closest point.
Yeah, that would not work because it would just overload the roads. I think the Faroe Island people were saying, well, maybe, a railway is a better way than cars coming across and all this stuff. Although I love the idea of just get my car on the boat at the weekend and in the tunnel at the weekend and going to France, but obviously I might be disappointed on that one. But
That'd be a lovely little jolly, wouldn't it?
yeah. You know, those things need to be protected, and we have to protect the things that are special about our community. But I think with the right will and the right thinking, I think all that's possible. And we do know that if we want people to come up with all the cons as well as the pros, we've got loads of people that will be able to tell you what's all the problems without question.
Yeah. Do you think that some of that is driven by sort of NIMBYism, as in not in my backyard?
Maybe there's a bit of that, but I think also there's a bit of conservatism in Jersey about big projects, and you know, and as I say, the people who are against things tend to be much louder than the people that are for things. So, you know, I think, you know, politicians have to get votes, get elected. So it's right that they listen to those things, but not be unduly influenced by very small minorities of people who.
Right, and have that populist kind of mindset where they just follow the whims of the...
Yeah. You know, they read somebody's column in the paper and, say, you know, and so that must be representative. It's not always representative.
And what would you like the public, or especially the kind of maybe the skeptics and the naysayers, to sort of take away from this conversation today?
Well, I would really like them to, you know, to just sort of jot down on a piece of paper the pluses as well as the minuses, and talk to the young people in their families about what they think about it, and then maybe be open to the idea of not necessarily building it, but just looking through the business cases, as we would say, as to the pluses and minuses, the costs and the benefits. I think the project's worth that, at least.
Kevin Keane, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much.